to love succulents. Let's see. I'm a pretty fair white lady, sometimes glasses, sometimes not, in my kitchen.
I'm Darlene, she, her pronouns. I'm wearing a gray sweater and I'm outside, and I'm part of the community. Thank you.
I'm Laura, Laura Stamus. I use she, her pronouns. I have sort of medium length brown hair. I'm also white. I have a nose piercing and so intimate. I'm in my bedroom because it's the quietest space in my house away from children.
Hi, I'm Annelise Griffin. I use she, her pronouns. I have on headphones and a flannel shirt, and I'm a pale white lady with a hair growing out in a variety of different ways piled on top of my head. And I'm in the living room of my house, and there will be a commotion at some point because the Wi-Fi somehow no longer reaches the bedroom, which is the place where the door shuts. So thank you for your patience.
Hey everybody, I'm Drift Maven. I use they, them pronouns. I'm very white. In my heart, I have Eddie Vedder hair, but I'm actually balding and have very short hair. I have a beautiful smile, forever cub, and it's great to see you all.
I'm Bob Edward. I always always working. I'm a white man. Him, I guess pronouns. I'm on the road and I'm in a basement. And I think the Wi-Fi is better.
Bob, thank you. And also you sounded quite a bit like Darth Vader. And if you want to throw that into the chat box, you're welcome to do that and keep your mic muted because it's crackly and very Vadery, which is a good look for you, but it's a little hard to understand.
So that can work at all. And that's what the strong can.
I can go. My name's Maya. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a white lady with long brown hair, and I'm sitting against a completely blank wall, which is kind of unnerving, but it's the only place that the light kind of works. So here we go.
And we also had an introduction in the chat from Cass.
Yeah, I can try to read it or say it. I'm having some trouble today, so I wrote it just in case. I'm Kaz. My pronouns are they, them, or he, him. I am white with glasses and some facial hair and brown, poorly kept hair, sloppily tied back right now. And I'm also wearing a green T-shirt. And I'm disabled and a disability justice activist and just in a lot of pain today, so I'm doing my best. All right.
In front of a beautiful rainforest.
Yes, yes.
Participate as you want, Kaz, in the chat, and I can read out the things that are in the chat if that works for you.
Yeah, thank you.
No problem. Happy to have you participate however works for you.
All right, thanks.
Yeah. Great. The first agenda item is an Emily Megas Russell special called Somatic Grounding Practice. We can be for 1 minute or less with our bodies and our breath if the committee so allows. I will just say a few words and it will be very brief because it's not my forte, and then we can continue on. So the purpose of this before I begin is just that our feelings and experiences matter and our information, and we want to make this as real and safe of a place as we can. So you are welcomed to find a position that is most comfortable to you acknowledging that comfort is not accessible to everyone. And put your hands in a place where they feel grounded, or your feet in a place that feel grounded, whether that's on your legs or on the ground or wherever that works for you. If you're standing, you can just feel your feet on the surface of whatever you're standing upon. And close your eyes. You can turn your video off if you'd like. You can leave it on if you'd like. It's all optional. And just spend a few seconds feeling your a sensation that is accessible to you, even if that sensation is the void. For many people, that's breath. For some people, that's the feeling of your hands on your body or your feet on the ground. And just spend a few seconds being with that sensation, and then we will regather, and I'll let you know when, maybe 30 seconds. Again, think about what you notice about your physical experience, and bring yourself back into the shared world, the strange digital shared world. And at some point when Emily's back, we can maybe share about those experiences. And for now, if we can just bring whatever grounding we can into the rest of this meeting, that will be great. Sound good? Okay, thank you for bearing with me. Okay, so our first agenda item, as I see it on my working agenda here, is checking in about our old business. And it says checking in about committee agreements, but we didn't actually get to make very many committee agreements. I sort of stated that some expectations, which is different than agreements. My expectations as a facilitator are that this space will be safe and safe enough, free enough from explicit hatred or bigotry or harm, and that is just the bare minimum. My expectation is also that folks will use the raise hand function to check in if they're not in the committee. I think for many committee conversations, committee members don't need to be that rigid. We can have some more popcorn style conversations, but for those of you who are observing or participating as the public, there will be space for public commentary, and that will be by the raise hand function. You can do that on your phone, I believe, by doing *9 to raise your hand, and I'll see that if you're joining by phone. By the phone, you can *6 to mute or unmute yourself. I'm leaving muting and unmuting yourself as options right now, as long as people recognize that raising hand is the way we're gonna facilitate that. I will try my very best to keep that an equitable way to share. And also that the chat is not really easily made part of public record. Things that committee members say in the chat, I'm gonna try to share out to make that part of the record and part of the explicit conversation as an accommodation. If folks have specific questions that go in the chat, I'm gonna largely read those aloud. Peter Elwell, the town manager, likened it less to side conversation and more to like shouting across the room, because we can only chat with everyone at once. So just keep that in mind and try to keep your sharing more like you're speaking into the room if you're able, and we'll take that as we go. Committee members, how do you feel about keeping the chat open to everyone as it was last time? Maybe a digital or actual thumb temperature reading of up, middle, or down, and I will make sure we have no strong opposition. Great. So we'll just keep the chat on until hopefully it doesn't ever become an emergency, but I'm going to keep it open for now, and that's great. The next thing I have on my list to check in about is follow up on a question that I believe came from Gary Stroud about alternates. And Emily did some sleuthing, which is very easy to do with such a accommodating town manager. And it appears that to me, and in the little that I kind of understand about this process, that if we were to engage with the concept of alternates, it would probably reopen the list of other people who applied to be on the committee, of which the person who asked was not one yet. He has applied to be on many other committees, and I believe is on some other committees, including the CPCC, which also could be a conflict that we would need to address with the select board for that specific person's request. But I think it would open up another potentially voting process with the select board. My personal feeling, just as one person, I'm not going to make a rule about it or anything, I don't want to hold power over the decision, but just my idea is that that will be a delay that we may or may not really have time for in this very short process. And that if somebody is unable to participate in the committee as it stands, I think we can probably still function and do the work with 8 people or 7 people. If everybody drops out, there's gonna be bigger issues than just finding an alternate. We'd have to figure out what is going on with this process that makes that a problem. And I hope that that doesn't happen. But so I think that Emily and my feeling is that engaging with the world of alternates would be quite a choice for us to make. That would take quite a bit of energy. Does anyone have any committee members have any discussion about that? Go ahead, Kelsey.
I'm just going to say that I think my primary concern about what we're diving into is that I really hope we can reach some outcomes that are, that are clear and organized and actually could lead to something. So I'm concerned about the timeline we have, and I definitely would like to avoid any unnecessary delays, like in our meetings and in the process. So, but with that said, clearly Gary Stradwood has a lot to contribute, and I hope that he'll be part of public participation. And I really hope, as much as we're going to strive to create anonymous testimony, it's super important that if we can be as public as possible, it's more likely that the outcomes that we reach will be received well. So I hope that's clear.
That speaks to 2 different points on the agenda that are going to happen today. So I'm grateful that you shared that. Lana?
Yeah, I want to second what Kelsey just said. I completely agree. And I think that since these meetings are open to the public, we can encourage Gary to attend the meetings and speak up as often as he would like to, and certainly make space for him to do so. In addition, we'll be dealing with him with the CPCC, hopefully. So we'll be room for that.
Any other discussion from the committee crew? We good to move on? Can I do another informal temperature check reading of moving on sans alternates for the time being? Of course, as things move, we'll be able to, this is a living process, hopefully. So I think that's a good decision right now that we can come to, just not to engage with opening the can of worms of alternates at this moment. The very next thing that we wanted to follow up on was a question about meeting with the CPCC and what that might look like, or what that might look like. Later in this meeting, we're going to be starting our conversation about who in the community do we need to talk to, and a little bit about what all the different ways of information gathering are going to look like. The CPCC is different than almost everyone else in that they're another committee of the town. They are also subject to open meeting law, just like we are. And that means that we both have legal responsibilities to keep that process transparent. So again, Emily did a little research. I'm going to summarize as best I can. If anybody has a well-researched legal correction for me, raise your hand. But it sounds like the ways that the information gathering and connection with the CPCC could happen are that we could hold a joint warned public meeting at some point if we choose to engage that way, or up to 2 reps from each committee could meet to gather information, not in a decisional way, but just in a informational gathering way, which is most of what we're going to be doing for the beginning of this process anyway. And I doubt that we would use that space to make decisions anyway. We're going to be making more like recommendations. And so it sounds to me like there's plenty of space for potentially any two committee members or us facilitators to reach out to that committee and talk to them about their experiences or different things that we all choose we want to get information about from them. And if we choose to, we could ask them if they want to have a joint public meeting. But I don't know that that will be necessary. That's just another, legally that is an option. So that's information about that. If there's no discussion, I don't know that we need to discuss that. We're not going to decide what of that we're going to do at this moment. That's just somebody asked for that information. So I wanted to give that. And the last thing we're going to check up on from last time is a follow-up about the regular meeting schedule. This will be particularly helpful for our interpreters who we have been engaging at a disrespectful last minute, frankly. And they're doing great. And does it work for everyone to continue Monday evenings for the next, until further notice, or at least through October? Can we continue that? If anyone has any way that doesn't work, please let me know, because I want you all to be included. Awesome. Great, we're trucking through this, y'all. Cooking with gas, as they say in the Midwest, where I'm from, maybe. Okay, check. Next agenda item. Emily, where are you? Establishing committee roles for this meeting. The two roles that we usually will establish are timekeeper and a note taker. I think I'm going to do timekeeping for this meeting because I have not shared that with anyone yet, what the breakdown of the time that I'm assuming everything's going to take. But if we could choose that for the next meeting, which is maybe what we talked about doing last time, then we can share the timekeeping role with others later. Does anyone want to take some notes? If not, it's okay. Oh, Laura! Yes, yes. If not, we are recording this meeting and I can go back and take more notes than I'm going to be able to take while solo facilitating. But Laura, if you want to take some notes, I can connect with you afterward about what all we need, and we can supplement it with the recording, I think. But if anybody makes a motion, we need their name. We need to talk about basically the meat of the sustenance of whatever agenda item we're on. If we come to any decisions, you'll do great. Thank you. All right. The first substantial order of business that we have this evening on the agenda is to make agreements about how we want to be in this space with one another. What are our agreements in terms of this process? And I do not usually do my work in town committees. That's not the way that I typically do the change work that I do in this world. So I just want to acknowledge that by saying that some of the ways that we work are imposed from above, frankly. There is a legal way of voting, for example. There's a majority voting process where if somebody puts something to a vote, it can be moved forward by a majority vote. There are ways of making decisions, like the smaller decisions that we've made so far, where if there's no dissent present, we can go on like a less formal consensus. But if there's dissent present, if anybody has disagreement, we should make space for that conversation and vote on it. I think that's the rules. Again, if there's a well-informed hand that wants to correct me on those things, I don't know if Peter's in the house, I don't think he is, but until we hear otherwise, that's how that part has to work, I think. Other than that, we get to decide a little bit, I think, about how we want to hold this work. And I think it's important, particularly given how painful this content can be for people, that we make space for each other to name some needs or desires about how we speak and share space. So I have a couple of things written down that might be helpful to us, but maybe before I do that, I can make space for you all to name some ideas about ways that we might agree to be in this space. And I think this would be an example of one of those instances where if there's disagreement, we'll make space for that disagreement and conversation and vote on things. But otherwise, we can make agreements by everyone being affirmative of the things that we can agree to. I see Bob just re-entered. So Bob, we're going to be making agreements with one and oh, left again. I think his internet is maybe struggling. Does anyone want to start? What are some basic, you don't have to spend a ton of time on this, but I did leave a little bit of time in the agenda for this important topic of some agreements of how we want to be together. Lana.
So I did have they're more of sort of a contract between all of us at how we approach this work together, understanding that these things are emotional and that we might come to them from differing points of view or different experiences in life. And so the first would be the concept of understanding that behind every emotion is a need. So if someone is expressing anger or fear or sadness, to listen and to think about the need that is driving that emotion. That would be one thing. The other would be, I had this great professor that taught us that the curiosity and judgment cannot exist in the same space at the same time. And so instead of being judgmental, if we hear someone who has an experience that comes, and I'm speaking as much to myself as I am to anyone else, that we understand that we need to be curious, either about what someone is saying, if it doesn't sound true or if it sounds intense, to really be curious and dig in and listen, So those would be the two things that I wanted us to keep in mind. And also holding each other with empathy and kindness, even if we disagree.
I think I want to echo everything that Lana just said, but I think if we can maintain awareness that if someone is coming from an experience or a place within the committee or anyone that we might be speaking with regarding these issues that you have not experienced, you haven't lived, then just maintaining that awareness. And so it's okay to not be able to relate and not understand, but maintaining that curiosity, asking open-ended questions rather than closed questions, meaning asking a question that's going to invite more sort of clarification or elaboration of what someone's saying, is you're really demonstrating that you want to understand, that you're recognizing that you can't relate, and that's okay, that's the way it is, right? But that you're seeking to understand the best that you can. And if we ask just closed-ended questions that lead to yes or no answers, the person that's sharing quite often will have this air of judgment to it, even if it's not your intention. So, yeah.
Can I jump in?
Yes, please. Thank you, Cass.
Thanks, Lana and Kelsey. Those are both really great points. We had already, Shay, you'd already said like this is an anti-oppression space. Like we're not, we're not entertaining racism and ableism. And I just want, like, I think that saneism is often left out, or people don't consider it as part of ableism. And I do want to just like make sure that this is a space without sanist oppression, and like, could people try to avoid using sort of pathologizing language, try to avoid mentioning people's diagnoses or dismissing people's, if we're talking about people in the community, like dismissing their needs on the basis of a psychiatric label. And sort of remember that or be aware that people with psychiatric disabilities are 14 times more likely to be victims of assaults than people without those diagnoses. but when talking about community safety, we're very often sort of villainized and thrown under the bus. And I just really would like to make sure people are aware of that in our discussions.
Thank you. I want to name too that people with psychiatric diagnoses or labels are some of the most policed people.
Yes.
And also that in our conception of this process early on, we talked about, in the whole kind of the group of people who were like bringing this process up, talked about focusing both on strictly policing and also systems of policing that happen. And that includes psychiatric incarceration, which is not totally dissimilar from other forms of incarceration. So I just want to name that our hope is that we are going to be talking with also crisis response people and people who have experienced sort of carceral crisis responses as part of our work. So that is going to be imperative in order for us to do the work as it is written. So I'm very grateful.
Thank you, Shay, for bringing, yeah, those are points that I forgot to mention there. Thank you. Thank you.
You don't have to give us all a comprehensive analysis of the whole world of that in one thing. You're doing great.
Okay, thanks.
I just really want to quickly, and then I promise I'll be quiet for other people, jump on that, because I've been thinking about something that all of us coming here to this committee, I hope and I believe that we may not all get it just right all the time, but we're going to come in pretty informed, right? And like value one another and try to do this right with the words that we use in the language. And I just wonder about if we need to, invite public participation. It's so important. And I've definitely observed in watching select board meetings and just, out in the world in general, sometimes people want to discuss these topics and maybe are just curious and wanting to understand, maybe have an element of disagreeing with it, but truly are seeking to understand, and they may not have the words, right? And so I just hope that we can still allow space for participation and listen and sort of seek to hear the intention behind the words. Because sometimes, I think it was a few select board meetings, there was a man that was clearly trying to do a really great thing with putting the banner up. I don't know if anybody caught that, but and he used some language that definitely isn't sort of up to speed per se. But what I saw was a man from my father's generation that was standing up for fantastic values in this community, and he said something that maybe wasn't quite right. But I heard the intention behind his words, and so I guess I just want to hope that maybe in this process we can guide and educate people, but let's also not sort of shut them down. Because if they're seeking to understand and trying to contribute and sometimes disagreeing with us, right? We're more likely to reach them if we can find common ground. So I absolutely value and hope within this committee that we hold that space. And I hope that we can be comfortable enough with ourselves to see the intention behind words. I hope yeah.
I wonder if I'm so sorry. Who?
Go ahead, Mom.
Okay. I wonder if there is a way, if someone is wanting to be a part of this process and maybe there's some problematic things being said, if there's a way to do a one-on-one or have an interview with that person instead of allowing that person's views to sort of hijack this process or make some portions of this process feel unwelcome. Because someone might use language that I find just slightly distasteful, but it might be really oppressive or harmful to someone else. So I just want to leave that open for discussion.
A lot of the things that we're naming for, I would, in my sort of artistic, imaginative mind, I think of as the stars that are guiding our general direction. The way that we're navigating is in the direction. And they're not exactly agreements that we can stick to as a committee necessarily. Hold everyone with kindness. I actually do not want to expect every one of you to be accountable, to be kind 100% of the time, because I don't know if that is a realistic human expectation. I think we could expect each other to use respectful language all the time or something like that, right? So there's a difference between sort of this things we're aiming for and then things that we're agreeing to. And I just want to name that. I think there's space to capture both and collect both. And there are also some like pretty common group agreements that address a couple of those things, I would say. Like if somebody says something that gives pause, we can make space for that pause. And the prescriptive way that meeting facilitators often name that is like, whoa, ouch, oops, or something. Like whoa is like, whoa, can we actually slow down? We're not necessarily all in agreement about that wording, concept, etc. We want to make space for that. Ouch is like that was a hurtful or harmful thing. There's a difference between hurt, harm, and abuse, and we can go over that later, but something about that was painful. Stop. And then oops is like a way to, and again, I don't know that I want to like require everyone to use these words, but oops is an acknowledgement when somebody names that they've been harmed of that harm. And I'm of the mind that we don't get to be like, just because I stepped on your toe and it was an accident, that your toe doesn't hurt. You still can say sorry even if there was not an intention to be harmful in that moment, because intention and impact both do matter. Even if somebody has no intention of being very harmful, that sometimes happens. So I want to just name that some of the seeds of agreements that I had on my thing were a little bit more like agreements and less horizons or aiming for things. And one of those is this idea of like pausing, naming if there's a hurt present if we're able to do so, and naming an apology if we're able to do so when hurt is present. And also centering both. We named in our mandate of the work that we're doing that we're centering anti-racism in this process. And that is also a star in some ways, not an agreement, because that looks different for a lot of folks. Having a white facilitation team is in some ways a challenge to that very aim, right? And I think centering anti-racism to me means acknowledging that racism is a systemic, structural concept, that it's not all about interpersonal intention. It's also a larger structure, and that we have to acknowledge the impact of that in this process. And we have to kind of only speak from our own lived experience when we're speaking about our own lived experience. And that is one of the reasons that we are going to build into this process listening sessions, hopefully facilitated by people from communities that, can we hire a BIPOC facilitation team or a facilitator to host some listening sessions with communities that are impacted by racism? Can we bring on a queer and trans co-facilitator to speak with their own community about the way that these things happen? My hope is that that can cut some of these unintentional harms and help us get real information in a less extractive way, in a more reciprocal way. That's people experiencing trust and community building and movement building while we're doing this process, and not just us taking in a way that it hurts. I have no interest in taking in a way that hurts. So those are some of my ideas. Also, are there other ideas about maybe slightly more concrete agreements that folks have an interest in us making? My idea about the process is maybe that I can finalize this and send it out with the next one, and we can finalize them in the next meeting, because that will be hard to do right now. But does anyone have any other ideas about needs that you have from the space or agreements that you would like us to make in the space?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, trying to foster like both and thinking instead of dualistic, that kind of thing. Just staying curious, and humble that we don't know it all, but holding that, many realities and experiences exist and can be true at the same time.
Thank you. I love that. Laura?
I was going to just echo some things that were very familiar that were already said. Like one of my favorite norms, I think it comes from aorta. It's no one knows everything, together we know a lot. And I'm really feeling that with this community. Like we each are bringing our own unique experiences. And then this goes along with what I think you were saying, Shay, is like, I also just feel like I am totally open to people calling me in because I definitely can make mistakes and have blind spots, especially as a white person. And so, yeah, I'm ready to be called in if needed at any point.
Yeah, feedback is explicitly welcome, I think, in this space, hopefully.
Something I was thinking about is like the scope of the work and just holding in mind kind of the larger vision of like holding the larger vision of like what it is that we're all hoping for in the world and what we kind of envision to be, you know, like an example being like decarceration as a goal. But at the same time being realistic about our timeline and the town budget that we're advising about and how like we're going to make some small steps. And yeah, just something to acknowledge that we can like hold the larger vision while we're doing the nitty gritty.
Thank you for that. I think that we have to acknowledge that this is one part, that we have, you know, lifetimes of work to do. And that simultaneously that can feel really hopeless. And also none of that lifetimes of work will be done unless we do our work right now. So this is one piece. Bob named it in the chat that he keeps losing connection. And I can also reach out to him maybe afterward and see if he has things to contribute to this as well, because I really want to make sure everyone is able to name what they need. Okay, any other burning agreements in your hearts or minds?
I just wanted to say that I appreciate everybody on this community and that there is people out there that has lived the experience of what we're discussing. And I agree with everybody to give people space and to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Generous to their opinion and not biased. Because I myself have lived the experience, both homelessness and addiction and incarceration. So I do know from experience what it was like and how I felt about it and how people judged me because of it. And now that this December will be 3 years clean, I've like overlooked everything that I've been through, and now I am trying to help people that are going through it still. So just be biased of people's feelings. That's what I say.
Thank you for that, Darlene. Being generous toward people's experiences and checking our bias is, I wrote it on the beautiful list that we are coming up with now. Bob says in the chat, this week a counselor on Next said, I don't know what Next is, but said racism gets under our skin and makes us all sick. Acknowledging the myriad impacts of racism and other forms of oppression is definitely an agreement that I would like us to have. New England News Collaborative, he said, is what Next means. Okay, I'm gonna format that a little bit, maybe do a little bit of weaving work of it, and I'm not sure yet what the warning process for language is like that I might need to submit that like with the agenda or something, but I'll bring some version of that into our next meeting.
I just want to say that I think we need to be careful to not make assumptions about what our common goal is. That's all in our agreements, you know. I think the point of this process is for us to evaluate it and make sure that we look at it from as many angles as possible from people that are impacted. And yeah, and so it's important to dream big, but I'm right now in this spot, not sure what I think, you know, the best outcome is. I think I totally identify with changes need to be made in certain areas that impact certain areas of our community, but then there are others where I'm not sure yet, and I'm hoping to get clarity in this process. You know, I guess I'm speaking as a survivor and a victim of violence, that I'm not quite ready to say that I believe that there's never a time for incarceration. I would love to reach that point in the world, but I think there's a lifetime of work, as you said, to get there. So anyway, I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, the goals that we have agreed to as joining this project are the ones that are sort of written down, I think, which include a sort of openness, frankly, about listening to the people most impacted by these systems, and the people who are in the systems. You know, the people. We're going to center the experiences of people who experience the systems. And we're also needing to kind of get information from the people who are responding to harm in our community about what exists. Because otherwise there's no way to build a bridge from here to there, from whatever the there is that we decide. But I think that's what that's the only agreement that we've come to regarding what our visions are for the future. And I know that even in the first meeting, we heard some people share there are different perspectives in this space about what the biggest horizon is. And I think that my hope personally is that this process makes space for wider visioning than has been possible in town, you know, in the time constraints and, you know, conceptual constraints of the governance of our community so far. So
I'm glad that you named that, Kelsey. It took us generations to get where we are today, and it's going to take generations to undo what has been done. And abolition is a long game. It is not like open the gates. And so I think it's really good that you named that in yourself, and that it might be existing in others, and I'm sure it is.
Yeah. And, you know, survivors are not a monolith, and people of color are not a monolith, and the ways that harm is responded to now changing doesn't mean that nobody should respond to that harm. And there's like so much that we're going to open up, and it fits in a different agenda item than our agreements. But I'm really grateful that we're like being open about those perspectives and differences and places of alignment, so that we can move together. And Darlene named in the chat that she also has experienced domestic violence and is grateful to be here in that role as well. As have I. Many of us have, turns out, and Cass. Okay, do we feel good about me taking a little bit of formatting role of trying to bring that conversation together and bringing that back to you next time and moving on from there? Thumbs, digital or real thumbs. I don't see any dissent, so I'm going to move on. Speak up if I'm moving over you. I don't ever want to steamroll anybody. We're not even behind schedule yet, you all. This is going great. I'm so grateful for you all. Yes, Bob, we can share the draft. I can share the draft. I think that probably belongs in the minutes. I'll double check about where it belongs. But I will share the draft openly before the next meeting, and there will be space to edit again. My hope is that's a living document. Halfway through this process, we could realize we really need another agreement to address something that's present, and we can make that. Yeah. Oh, one more thing I want to add to that. Emily had a point about that, which is just that we cannot guarantee safety. And so I personally want to avoid this terminology that floats around a lot about a safe space, because safety looks different to each one of us. We can make it as safe as possible. And what I think we can do is attune to the idea of safety, and that safety is, different for all of us and all of the people that we're going to be engaging with. And I think we have some great ideas we'll talk about a little later in the agenda about ways that we can do the information gathering work about people's really sometimes intense experiences, while acknowledging that if we don't attune to safety and have some awareness of the trauma and pain behind some people's experiences, we're just going to be doing that extractive, like pain and dash process that we're not interested in doing. So one of the other stars that I'm using to guide me is this idea that there are ways of asking and ways of conversing that are safer than others for most people, and that we're going to try to do those things as we move on, and while being open to feedback. But some people call that trauma informed or trauma reducing or harm reductionist. There are lots of like words for these different ideas, but we're going to try to be aware that just asking people about the most intense experience of their life with no framing or support or resources or like care or ability to hold those conversations responsibly and then dipping is a bad way to engage with your community. So we will not be doing that. Okay, let's move on. The next agenda item that I have, correct me if I'm wrong, is community engagement. That is the piece of this sort of like generally two-pronged process that is, how are we engaging with the experiences of our community around these systems of policing or these carceral systems or whatever. So it says, you know, on our agenda that the sort of tagline of the community engagement section of the process is centering the voices and experiences of those most impacted by police intervention or danger or harm in our community. That our role in that is going to be to think a little bit about how we're gathering information about those experiences. How are we doing the centering? How are we attuning to safety? And hopefully aiming toward also some community building and making this like not just a process where the only outcome is a report, but where people are actually engaging with these concepts more in community. That's the goal that I have. Being trauma informed and thinking about who our collaborators might be. Those are the sub ideas inside of the community engagement agenda item. I also want to make space within the next 15 minutes, maybe now, to take a little break, a bathroom break. This topic might take up to a half an hour. I wonder if the time for a break is nigh. And by nigh, I mean now. I'm just talking old time. Lana, you had your hand up. No, I will put it down for you with my finger. Can we take a break for 5 minutes so we can attend to ourselves, and we will be back at 6:56 to talk about community engagement. Okay, thanks everybody. We'll see you in 5. I saw a meme the other day that said that Zoom meetings are like modern day seances. You're like, Elizabeth, can you hear me? We can't see you, but we can hear you. And that's what I think when I call us all back from our break. Can you hear me? I don't know if you're there.
You're doing great flying solo, Shay.
Thank you.
Seamless.
Thank you. I don't mind facilitating things, but the digital crossover into the digi world is slightly intimidating. I only gained my full Zoom licensure superpowers today, so I fiddled with the settings quite a bit. And also, I'm operating in absolutely borrowed office space every time I'm in a different place. And if anybody knows of a COVID-safe little office for me to sneak into once a week on the evening, you let me know privately, because it's a funny, I have very rural bad internet, so we are here. Come back. We're here. Let's get started. So, community engagement. Review and determine methodologies is the first little section of that agenda item. I think, unfortunately, that means me doing a little bit of talking and then us talking together. Some of the ways that we have written in our proposal that we might gather information from our community about their experience of these systems is public forums, listening sessions, anonymous or electronic submission, and one-on-one sort of interviews or one-on-one listening. I have written down just a couple of ideas about each of those things. And it might make sense for us to just begin thinking about if anyone here has interest in helping with any of those types of information gathering, and just begin to think about those when we move into another part of the same agenda item, which is who are the people in our community that we are wanting to engage with. So I would imagine that we're going to be wanting to engage with different people differently. And that there will be some people that will want to, that it will be most efficient or appropriate to do a one-on-one listening session with, and there will be some people that it's most efficient or appropriate to be in a listening session, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to name just a couple things about what we envision each of those to look like, and then we can move on and talk about the who's and how's of the rest of that. So I imagine that one-on-one interviews are going to be something that are largely, but not necessarily exclusively, held by me and maybe also Emily. One-on-one interviews have a pro, which is that they could be pretty incredibly private. They're not as private as online anonymous testimony, but information that we gather in that way could be de-identified before it comes back to public meeting. So it could be all the identifying details could be taken out so that a person could have quite a bit of privacy and anonymity in their sharing, should they desire that. Some people that we might do one-on-one interviews with won't need that at all, like a manager at a community mental health agency might be most appropriate to get information from them in a one-on-one interview, which is a phone call between me and them on a Thursday afternoon or whatever. And that may not need to be as de-identified. But if somebody wants a person on the other end of a phone to share some information about their experience, we could open some of that up to committee information gathering roles. I think that would be allowable in the law. I want to be really careful that we give committee members enough tools to handle that information and that conversation in a very supportive and safe way. I know that I have experience in doing that. I'm hoping that we can build enough trust so that you all trust me to hold that information in that way. And we can talk about in the next phase of this very agenda item, what that might look like to be safe in those spaces. But one-on-one interviews will be a lot, I think, of what we do. The risks of that might be reactivity of trauma, which is a risk of any kind of information gathering that we're going to do. And a benefit might be that we can be continuing to do sort of relationship building in a more intimate way with people. We can talk about who we imagine that might be supportive to, but I think that might be a form of information gathering that we do with many people who work in systems as well as have experienced systems of response in our community. Listening sessions would be one vision of what that could look like, is that we would either ourselves as facilitators with a couple of committee members, or as co-facilitators that we hire out from community, hold a listening session with the people that are connected to that community within our community. We imagine that might look like a local LGBTQIA+ org hosting a listening session with a facilitator that is, from that community. We might seed that with questions, but that community could meet and then give the data back to one of us to de-identify, and then it can come to public meeting, the aggregate data that is collected in that space. The Root or many other, organizations may, or a sub-program of the Root, Youth for Change may be able to, we may be able to engage, a co-facilitator from that space to host a listening session with a group of people who are statistically impacted by policing and police systems. I think that there's less anonymity within that space, of course, than there might be with an online anonymous tool or potentially a one-on-one interview. It could be de-identified for the larger community, but within that space, you're saying what you say. Benefits could be movement building and community building and relationship building, potentially. I don't know. It depends on how it goes, but I could imagine that, I do imagine that every time we have conversations about these issues and every time that we get connected to our community members who also are experiencing the same struggles that we're experiencing, that's like weaving a thread into a net, a safety net. And that could be another reciprocal function of that type of space that's not less extractive potentially. So
Shay,
yeah, go ahead.
I hate to interrupt you. I just want to ask a clarifying question because I just want to understand the idea of having, say, like a co-facilitator, for example, that you just used, LGBTQ plus, host something without a committee member or a facilitator present, take the information and bring it to us. I recognize the benefit to that, but how do we avoid on the other end when we're producing this information as the committee, like the sort of opposition seeing that as potentially organizations having like an agenda that they just give us. Now, I totally understand why we would use those tools, and I recognize the benefit and how it would help people, but I'm just wondering, like, how do we make sure that this information that we're gleaning from that process isn't questioned? You know what I'm saying? I'm a little worried about that. If we don't have at least one of us part of it, in that sort of, I can see the one-on-one, but I'm just wondering, like, sort of a group model.
Yeah.
If we don't have representation of some kind.
I don't think that the only way listening sessions could go would be without one of us necessarily. But I also wouldn't want to immediately, without checking in with you or them, impose one of our presence if that would be harmful in some way. I think that's up for conversation to me. I can imagine, for example, certain spaces that already exist in the community for people of a specific lived experience where I don't fit in that space. Maybe someone in this committee does, maybe they don't. And if we want to be getting information from people of a lived experience that particularly is not represented on this committee, that might be a space where having one of us present would be harmful or not helpful. I think if you all and we decided that having somebody from here in those spaces was very important to us as a committee, we could talk about that.
I totally recognize the value, and I totally hear what you're saying. And I'm just simply saying it's super important to me that as we gather this really important information from people that are willing to share it, that we can produce something that's not going to be seen as like, you know, just agendas thrown in. That's all I'm saying. I recognize the value, and I think we should try to fit that in. I'm just bringing up the question because I know there are plenty of people out there that would say that, right? Like people were saying that even just trying to get the RFP to where it is. So I'm just throwing that out there. Like, how do we make sure that it's the outcome is respected by the broader community?
Yeah, I want to say one thing, and then I see Lana's hand, which is that we cannot guarantee that we will not be questioned. We have been questioned at every step of this process and supported in greater measure, largely. So far, some of the challenge and critique that I've heard from folks has actually been almost the opposite of what you're saying, which is how will we almost center the voices of those organizations and not necessarily center the people who have been experiencing the response or experiencing policing. So I think there will be several people in the community who might even be happy for this to be fully taken over by nonprofits and not happen in this forum at all. But we can never guarantee that we won't get critique. I think one group that I'm thinking about as a former crisis worker is survivors. If there's a regular space where survivors meet and there is trust built in that space over time, it may not make sense to inject ourselves into that space. It might, but it may not. We'll have to speak with the people who do that work about what their perspective is. And I think that there's plenty of good argument to be made that I would feel just solid about regardless of critique. That is, the people who are doing that work are actually holding those experiences day in and day out all the time already. And I don't know that that would be, if we are seeding some questions to them, if we're like handing over, these are some of the things we're hoping to get information about from the community that you're serving and supporting, my hope would be that that organization wouldn't, editorialize so much that they're injecting their own agenda as much as just, we can add that into the space that we already hold, or we can hold a space for that if that works. So I want to leave that a little bit flexible personally, but I totally hear that question and maybe other people, I saw Lana had a hand, maybe other people have ideas about that. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, I want to say that I think it's super important to think about, at the end of this process, having our work being taken seriously and having people believe and trust us. That being said, I think the people that are going to question the stories of the survivors or question the stories are going to be the people that would question it no matter how we gather this information. It reminds me of the highly publicized shootings of Black people at the hands of police, and it doesn't matter if there's a video camera there or not. The people who are unwilling to believe that information are unwilling to believe it at any cost. And that being said, and as we take information, as we take things that are anonymous or we're de-individualizing, we can't guarantee, we can't place a human being right in front of you telling their story. And even then, it's someone's story versus someone else's, perception of reality. So.
I would say we could keep that question in our mind, Kelsey, as we move forward about sort of balancing essentially like safety and legitimacy, maybe, as we move forward in thinking about these different ways of gathering information, and keep that as one of the many factors in our minds as we craft these different spaces. And I think where our presence is welcome, I want to be there. I don't think that the goal is to like put this off if us being there would be useful in any way. If there are spaces that people think might be best held very privately, with like the youth that the homeless youth that they support, who work with them and they feel like there's a good relationship there. I don't know that necessarily having somebody who's not in that community, I don't know, it may or may not support that. We can like work that out with the people we might bring in to co-facilitate, hopefully.
I just end with, I totally recognize, I'm not questioning legitimacy at all and value it completely. I'm just bringing up the question that of what I've already said, but I'm right there with you. That
I hear
makes
you.
sense.
I hear you. And yeah, I think that that's a valid concern that, so, you know, to use survivors as another example, because I'm part of that community, I think that that's a constant battle and change making in that community is, you know, if the story doesn't have every single detail that that person does not owe the world and isn't, you know, whatever, then maybe it's like people are less willing to listen to it. And yet we see time and time again that even when all the details are present, every nitty gritty detail, and the person's face is there and they are perfect and they are an all-star and there's nothing wrong with them and they're the perfect innocent, you know, survivor narrative that is a false myth, then people still challenge that sometimes. So we can balance that and continue to think about it. I will continue to think about that as we move on. Two other forms of information gathering that we imagine are some form of anonymous online information gathering. We will need to build a tool, whether it's the people, you know, facilitators, people in this committee, or we may bring in someone to help us with maybe the tech aspect of that, or the data analysis aspect of that. I had a conversation with John Ungerleider today. He put forth an alternative proposal to the RFP that didn't exactly answer the RFP, but was sort of supplemental about an online anonymous data tool that was a bit redundant to our proposal. We didn't see each other's work beforehand, so it was good that he was making sure that that base was covered, but he named that he might be one of the people who might be able to help with data analysis if that's needed. I don't know what our data analysis skills are within this committee. But that tool would essentially be us. Again, we're going to craft the questions, and that might include what demographics do you belong to that you want to share? You know, what identities or experiences do you bring to this that are relevant that you want to share? And then some way of gathering people's experiences with policing and policing systems that people might not want to share, with any possibility of their information being attached to it in any way. And we're going to do a darn good job, I think, of de-identifying information from other forms of gathering also, but acknowledge that there are people for whom that might feel like a much more accessible way of sharing. Pros, obviously, anonymity, very, very high. You know, risks may reactivate trauma just like all of the other ways. And also that exactly what you're sharing, Kelsey, that some people may not be able to listen to that as easily as they do things that are shared in a more public forum. And then lastly is public forums, which we get to decide how we want to engage with, one or more public forums. And I think that that would be a great opportunity for some of the you know, people in this committee to share their experiences if they want to do it in that format. People from this committee can share their experiences in any of those formats, including de-identified formats. But if anyone's excited about sharing in that way, that might be a space for that. And also in our proposal, we named that there might be space for some creative, expressive possibilities of, like, you know, engaging with these ideas. And I was imagining that one of those spaces might be open to more mediums than just testimony, formal verbal testimony, holding stories and experiences with reverence and support and enough seriousness, but also maybe like an open mic, you know what I mean? Where people could share those things in a creative way. So those are some of the formats that we might use to collect information. Does anyone have any discussion that they want to share about that before we move on to talking about sort of trauma and attending to trauma and who our collaborators might be?
You mentioned you weren't sure what data analysis capacity existed in this group, and I just wanted to throw out there, I have worked in data analysis and been a research assistant a couple times, so I would like to volunteer for any of that.
Awesome. If you're willing to share those gifts with us, then that will be very useful and amazing.
Great.
I'm just wondering if like we want to use a tool like a strategy grid, you know, something that is already mapped out like a template for collaborators and, you know, all those things. If anybody knows what I'm talking about.
Do you want to share more about what you're talking about for those who don't know about it?
I don't know, I'm just thinking about social work school and policy classes, and we use like grids as sort of help to get like just a foundation, like these are our collaborators, this is what they can do, this is what we want to ask from them. Just a very basic like starting thing to sort of focus us and I guess a brainstorming thing, but in an organized way. I could send it, I guess, in the email. Like it might help us save time.
Yeah, that sounds like a potentially useful tool. Another tool that's in the proposal is talking about like mapping in a visual way. What is the sort of ecosystem of response that exists in town? So like that could be like a flow chart, like somebody calls for help. Here are all the different people who might be called for different kinds of situations. That could look like, you know, including some of the grassroots community organizations that provide all kinds of less formal safety support. It could look like just sort of mapping out who are all the people that we are considering, and that may, once we get information and we can plug that information into that map, which could be organized in many ways. There's like the visual version and then a, you know, less expressive version, but I think that might also help us see like where gaps are, or where there's a redundancy, or are there roles that we don't think should exist that exist? Are there roles that we do think should exist that don't exist? That's another way that we'll be plugging that information in about like the community organizations and community groups. And I will begin drafting that this week with whatever we, as a very, very, very beginning, you know, version of that, based partly on this conversation and people that you all think we need to engage with. Awesome. Anybody else have anything to share? The next moment of the agenda around community engagement is somatic grounding and attunement to safety, and why that matters and what we might do. Again, EMR is the captain. Emily Megas Russell is the captain of that specific vessel, and I also know a bit about that, and so do many of you. I think that I named before that we want to really make sure that we are being responsible and respectful and not extractive and as reciprocal as possible when we're taking information from people about harmful experiences. The potential is high for this process to ever activate somebody's memories and feelings and, you know, big emotions and sometimes trauma about these sort of things that we're asking for information about. And we want to make sure that we are organizing our information gathering in a way that is as non-harmful as possible, and that we are giving you all the tools that you might need to participate in that information gathering as you are interested in doing so. So one of the things that might be helpful at the end of this agenda item would be for you all to name, just in a preliminary way, which of these types of information gathering you might want to help with, if any. And in terms of especially sort of listening sessions or one-on-one interviews particularly, we don't want to send every single committee member out to conduct a bunch of interviews with no agreements or tools about how to do that in a way that's authentically supportive and not just going to make somebody feel like garbage at the end of that experience. So some of the tools that we had already been thinking about are really centering ideas around consent and informed consent, and making sure that folks know that they don't have to participate in things that they don't want to participate in, that everything in this is completely voluntary, that questions can be skipped, that people can pause or stop or change their mind about, you know, wanting to continue, that like we really honor people's wherever they're at in conversations that might include some intense feelings, that we learn ourselves to pause and be in the moment that we're in and not steamroll over the moment that we're in to get to our goal, which is an outcome, but rather can sit in discomfort with people and not put our goals over their experience. And to honor yes and no from folks about how they want to participate. Offering some choice in how people share or participate. I think that speaks a little bit too to Kelsey's point earlier about sort of open-ended questions and not sort of channeling people into yes or no boxes. Body check-ins, if the people want to do body check-ins about how they're feeling. And any kind of like grounding that folks might want to do as they're moving through things. I saw a hand already, maybe from Laura. Folks might have other ideas about ways that we might attune to folks' safety and comfort and feelings in those spaces. Anybody have any ideas? Yeah, Maya.
I think just providing a ton of information up front about exactly what will be done with the information and like, you know, just providing that context so that people can feel like they trust the process as much as possible.
Thank you. Anybody else have ideas about activation or trauma or safety as we think about how we might engage with this information gathering process?
Are we going to be offering any kind of care response? You know, like if you're doing a study and saying we have counselors available, or, you know, I mean, like, is there going to be a care, a nest response or something? I don't know if we can, just wondering.
That's a great question.
Yeah, I also had that question, Drift. Thanks for saying so, especially when we're talking about communities of color and communities where there really aren't care responses in Brattleboro in place for those communities. So we're asking people to dredge up some trauma, but then, yeah, what can we offer them on the other end of that trauma? That's the question.
That's a great question. Emily and I had spoke just in the last couple of days too about the likelihood that folks may also be sharing about things that are not yet even sort of resolved in a way. Things that are somewhat active experiences, and that it may be part of our useful work to at least compile a list or an offering of resources for the different types of challenge that people experience. And I was thinking particularly about racial discrimination and policing. Are there statewide or local resources, if people are naming that is an experience that they've had, that is like a more active and knowledgeable advocacy resource than this committee, which is, hopefully we can be supportive to people in the experience of information gathering, and not each one of you is like a legal advocate or a counselor, depending on the type of harm that people are sharing about. And so I think we had already sort of thought that we maybe need to do some resource gathering so that we can have that at the ready for folks. And it sounds like that might not be the only kind of resource that it might be helpful to offer. And I wonder what the possibilities are for direct sort of care response on the other side. I personally am of the mind, and the training that leads me to feel like that doesn't need to always look like a person with a lot of letters at the end of their name in order to work well. And am a big fan of peer support and other kinds of support that includes people with some, grounding and training, but like in a just how to be with each other type of way. And I wonder if we might be able to connect with some folks in that world and offer support either from people in this committee or from our community slightly outside of this committee for people after they have shared about things. I know that in the process leading up to even this happening, there was some really beautiful community offers of support when meetings were really like triggering and stressing people out. When meeting spaces felt like there was like racism present, that some folks were, or ableism or saneism present, that felt like folks were offering just organically to sort of reach out and connect with each other afterward. And we might be able to like build that into as a more like baked in formal part of the process, which is genius, you all, just genius. I'm writing it down. Okay. What does support afterward look like? I'll talk with Emily Megas Russell about that also. She may have some also good ideas. She often does. Kaz used to work in that realm and might be able to reach out to folks. And there's also Maya named in the chat that there are also some free and accessible sort of resources but available by phone for folks that we might be able to offer as well. And we might just have a group of people who support this work who like want to be the phone check-in person after folks share. It might look like a lot of ways, but maybe we can explore that a little bit, and I can put that on the next time's agenda to talk about aftercare of this kind of sharing. And Drift has a lot of compiled resources as well. So I can reach out to you all who just shared about what you have to offer, and we'll keep it live and bring that to the next session too. Thank you. It's almost like doing this as a team is going to be really helpful, effective, and awesome. Okay. I think we talked a little bit about the expressive possibilities that we want to build in, expressive possibilities for how people can share. But I think that might look like the public forums, a public forum being open to different kinds of interpretation. It might look like a call out about art that people make about their experiences. We may have a mixtape that is accompanying our report at the end of this. I'm just saying, I would love that, and it's not a prescription, but we'll see what happens. But we may be able to like engage people in different ways. Laura, was that a hand? No, that was like, heck yes. Awesome. And maybe you all can just think about that too, about what ways of engaging people's experiences we might want to share. Bob just wrote in the chat, I want to read because his mic is vadery. What if the information that someone gives us is actionable, i.e. following Drift's observation, what concrete care can be given? What if legal needs are uncovered? Anonymous info, I agree with Lana's observation, but in my experience, evidence that is not direct is often less credence. De-identifying is difficult if the story is unique. This is a small town. Very good points. Regarding de-identification, there are many tools for de-identification that exist that address this small town problem. And we can talk in more detail, hopefully maybe when Emily comes back, about some of those tools. Some of them that I know about are just aggregating the data. We're not going to maybe share each person's explicit whole story, but we're going to be sharing a larger sum of the type of information that we're getting. it looks like changing not only a person's name and location, but also just really omitting the specifics enough from anything that we're sharing explicitly that it could not be construed in a type of way that you could really guess who the person is. I think that will look like not sharing a lot of stories in a whole manner. I don't think this report is going to have space to just be all of the experiences that we've collected in a big manner. We're going to be sort of congealing them and aggregating them. And also regarding actionability, I think it is important for us to be very clear when we're in information gathering mode about who amongst us is a mandated reporter, who is not. Yeah, many of us might be, I'm not. You know, there are other ways of getting information from people who are not in spaces where that's relevant. There are some professions that require folks to be. There are very few, luckily still for a while, professions that require people not to be, like domestic and sexual violence crisis workers. And we need to be that's part of the informed consent of sharing. And I think that's one of the many reasons that I imagine that me holding some more of the one-on-one interview space, and then us being really choiceful as a committee about who else is doing one-on-one interviewing and what kind of same page grounding we want to have amongst those of us who are going to be doing one-on-one interviewing is going to be really important. And I might advocate that people who are mandated reporters do not do that type of interviewing. Just plug in all the different beautiful ways, but just being extremely explicit about that. Sometimes folks don't even know really what that means. So I think we need to be absolutely clear with folks about what might happen to their information when they give it to us. And my other hope about actionability is that we can support people in actions that they want to happen with a resource list or with a support plan. Not a full-on support plan, but like people who want to check in afterward or whatever. Because I don't think that it is within the bounds of our work to like be fully doing one-on-one advocacy for individual situations through this committee work in this phase of the process. I don't know that we have, it's not in our mandate of what we're working on to take on a case of a specific person. And we want to be making sure that people get enough support for what they're sharing and the types of support that they want, not involuntary types of support that they don't want, is pretty important. So please bring more ideas about that part as we continue to craft these, the ways that we're gathering this information also. The next agenda item, which I think is one that you all can be very helpful with, is beginning the list of people that we want to make darn sure that we are getting information from or collaborating with. I would like to ask that we don't name in this space at all individual people who have experience with these systems. That's not what this space is for. We're not going to be like, oh, my friend so-and-so, they were arrested recently. Their children were just, impacted by DCF. That's not what this space is going to be for. That's not consensual. This is a public open meeting that is recorded. There are newspaper reporters in the meeting observing right now. Rather, this space might be for what organizations, community groups, advocates, whatever, who are the players or communities of people who have experienced systems. Do we want to make sure that we are collaborating with? And we can begin to think about how, but this is just the seeding the list. And you can continue to think about this and bring more to the next meeting. But do folks have ideas off the top of their head about who are we wanting to really get information from that we can begin to think about?
The one group that I saw that I don't think is on the list is the drop-in center.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of folks who are at the drop-in center are people who are also on parole or who are, dealing with the police very heavily. And I want to say, yeah, I am a mandated reporter. So unfortunately,
yeah. It doesn't, I don't want to say that that closes off the possibility of any interviewing, but we maybe want to name to folks like, these are the folks that we have available to interview you who are not. These are the folks who are. This is the safest potential option. If anything like that might possibly come up, this is totally legit and good if that's not part of what you're worried about at all and you want to speak with.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's really,
or whatever. Yeah.
As the only Black person on this board, I think it's really important that I'm able to, you know, organizations like The Root or people who might not be as comfortable speaking to someone who is not a person of color. So however we can navigate that.
Right. And that might be a space for co-facilitators to come and join us as well. And maybe in collaboration with you, or yeah, we can keep that in mind. The Root, the drop-in center. Kelsey, what were you gonna say?
Well, two things. I'm also a mandated reporter, you know, as a woman with an active relief from abuse order and with my abuser currently incarcerated, and a lot of experience holding space for other survivors in our community. I know that I could offer something. However, yes, like as a mandated reporter, often how I interface with people is because kids are either in DCF custody or we're trying to work to avoid that. So yeah, that is something that, yeah, I want to be aware of. But at the same time, I do have a lot to offer in that area. But I wonder, I don't know if this is an option, but I know Women's Freedom Center is certainly one, but I wonder, can we at least invite, I don't know if they can even say yes, but Windham County State Attorney's Office victims advocates, because they are definitely part of the process and they play a really big role. I don't know whether there are like restrictions, whether they would have to say no, but I would love if we could try.
Yeah.
It'd be great to have disability rights on there too.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and restorative justice as well on that note.
The Community Justice Center.
The psychiatric survivors.
I know that there's also a restorative justice group at the high school. I know that the, you know, sort of chaotic end of the year last year, and a lot of the kids who were really active in that were graduating seniors. So I'm not sure, you know, what sort of shape it's in at this point, but that could, for that sort of like teen perspective, but also from an RJ point of view, I think would be really useful.
Great.
I
And
did
also-
restorative justice. I'm sorry. I did
No, go ahead,
restorative justices with Mel Motel, and I got a certificate, so I'm pretty familiar with that program too. So
Awesome. Maybe you could be one of the folks who helps make connection with that community. That would be awesome. Youth organizations also, I just want to name that we have already thought about Youth for Change, which is a program of the Root, and also potentially both as a systems voice and the experience, you know, the community of people who experience systems voice, maybe, you know, youth services also. There are different kind of parts of this. I think there are many organizations that are part of systems of response that are interested in helping and supporting this work. Many of them have reached out to us or were very open to our connections as the process was beginning. Quite large organizations, HCRS has named that they would be supportive of us in whatever way they are able to do. Also, I think that we are going to be talking with the police, of course. We're going to be getting a lot of information from them about their policies and procedures and practices and statistics. And we've already communicated with them about the initial ask for that information, and they've been very open to giving that to us. We may do a listening session within the police department. I'm also interested in hearing from people who have experienced mental health crisis response from the crisis team, and also potentially the crisis team, about that part of the system, which is often overlooked and definitely leads to people being incarcerated, and maybe alternatives in that realm as well. Full conflict of interest disclosure, my partner is the manager of a peer support department, and I think talking to folks who do peer support could be a very helpful part of this process. as
This
well,
is-
and people
this
who support and peer support realms.
I've wondered a lot about this piece too. Just a lot of experience professionally and personally with that process of crisis response, and people ending up in the ER for sometimes over 24 hours in that tiny little room, and then I mean the whole nightmare of a process that we know happens. So I don't know, would it, I mean, I know generally people are waiting and waiting for crisis to be able to come and do the screening and all that. So it probably doesn't necessarily make sense to have to talk to the ER department, or does it? I mean, I think they do interface with people that are in crisis, and there's a lot of room for improvement in how they do. But again, I'm just throwing questions out there. Like, I don't know, is that beyond our scope? To me, what I've witnessed and experienced, it's really not, we need to do better. So I'm just putting that out there.
It's part of the, when I'm imagining this, I'm imagining that there are certain things we really need to focus on as central, and that includes police, and that includes, you know, the way that policing itself happens. And there's a lot that's connected with that is directly connected with that, including the ER. People get, you know, orders of non-hospitalization and other legal sort of impositions placed on them when they're in emergency rooms. They're part of that flow chart in my mind of how, when somebody is in trouble, who gets called and how, they're in that flow chart. And so I don't think it would be out of our scope to check in with them. I think a lot of these people, the check-in might look like Emily and I having a phone conversation with them over an afternoon, right? Or we have time to do that. We are going to be working on this at least 10 hours a week for the foreseeable future. So I think that a lot of it might look like those kind of one-on-one interviews with people within those systems. Somebody has asked, John Underlighter, the guy who had that sort of tandem proposal, asked in his proposal for there to be, as part of this sort of process, a roundtable of those providers to think about solutions. And our initial response was, not yet. First, we need to get information about what people are thinking about, how the solutions that exist are going out, who are people who experience that. Because there are plenty of spaces and tables for service providers already, and they could have a table that's focused on this, but we want to be able to hand them this report basically before the solutions are even entering the picture. We're not at a solutions point if we don't know what the problems are yet. And if we're not listening to people who are yelling about what the problems are for a long time. And so the point of this process is to get those experiences on the table. And there's going to be plenty of space for lots of beautiful collaboration, I think, as a phase 2. When we say, okay, so, you know, youth services and crisis and the ER and the police and HCRS and groundworks and SEVCA and everybody, this is what folks are saying they're experiencing. You are going to be impacted. You're going to be doing some systems change, hopefully. You're probably already thinking about systems change. Here's some really great information. Town, this is our recommendations. Whole community, this is a resource that we've created for you about this stuff. So that's the hope.
Is the retreat a part of this as well, or no?
I think it could be.
I mean, if we're talking about
I would
the
hope so.
ER,
I would recommend it.
It's vast. The retreat is a vast entity.
I mean, they've got, 700 employees.
Yeah, it may be the largest employer in our community. At one point it was, I know. And it is a place where people are, people have disagreements about the language, but functionally incarcerated. There are locked units where people don't have access to bathrooms or food or water without checking in with someone, and have to take medicine or be restrained or whatever against their will often. So I think that it would be fine to include that as part of this ecosystem map of response.
Yeah, and a lot of times when people talk about, well, we should de-emphasize policing and we should start thinking about mental health, well, those systems can also be very harmful.
Yeah.
And I think in Brattleboro, there's a lot of talk about that as well.
Yeah, and there's also a lot of great advocacy and alternatives within and outside of those systems that have started. And so I want to make sure that that's part of the ecosystem map too, and might be part of the recommendations. There are, do we need something other than this high level of response for every situation that might be incarceration? Maybe that we need a dropout, freak out space, or whatever other things might come up. I don't know what those things are yet, but we're going to find out what the people on the ground think.
I think if we're talking about policing, we also need to look at probation and parole, since it's a sort of added level of policing for people who have been incarcerated and can often add another level of stigma to that already stigmatizing experience.
Thank you for that, Annelise.
Thank you for bringing that up. I definitely was wondering whether we could bring them in as well. Both sides of the unnecessary challenge for folks trying to re-enter and sometimes seriously dropping the ball with victim services. So I'm really glad you brought that up.
Thank you.
I think at some point we have to include the Department of Mental Health and Economic Services, because if you think about everybody being housed in a hotel who's got stacked disadvantages and addiction, like it's going to be a major safety issue. And again, I'm not going to represent the retreat in this committee since I work there, but there is a lot that impacts what people have access to in the mental health and how and their pathways to it, and DMH is part of that, impacting why people are kept involuntary or how long it takes to get a court hearing, all those things. There's a lot of complicated things beyond just the retreat, and the retreat has major responsibility too, of course, but some of the barriers are related to the laws in Vermont and the Department of Mental Health, in my opinion, too.
And in this movement generally, Lana, you're totally right that people say, well, maybe we need to put more money into, police social workers. Maybe we need to put more money into other mental health supports. Maybe we need to put more money into a lot of different pots of money that could happen. And I think part of what we are going to hopefully learn in this experience is, what do people actually think will help keep them safe? Those are in moments of crisis, and that's also a baseline of safety in our world. And that might look like housing, which you just named. Economic Services has a great responsibility for how people are housed. People who are unhoused are radically less safe. There are even further places where we might envision resources to be given, or space to be given for those to be considered as safety supports. And that might reduce the amount of reliance on these crisis responses, because we might reduce the amount of crisis that we experience in our culture. And we also have to have people who can show up in crises to support people who are in danger. And so it's a very broad picture of this ecosystem that we're going to be talking about. Please think about more places that might be on the map. All of these places, I want to say, there are places that we may see as individuals, as part of the problem or part of the solution. We may see them, any of us may see them differently. They may be both. They may be, places may just, we all might have different perspectives about that, and that's okay. We're going to be trying to do information gathering with folks about that. The list is not comprehensive. It exists. We can keep it alive and keep bringing things to that conversation. We don't have very much time left, and the last agenda item is, it says that we can look at the schedule of our larger schedule and think about when these different things might happen. I think that we should look at the schedule as homework for next time. The schedule has a sort of loose outline of when those types of things might happen, and you all maybe can bring back as your homework ideas about how many public forums do you think are important? What do you think about who should be interviewed one-on-one versus in a listening session, etc.? And we can really finalize that kind of planning more next time. The last thing that's sort of on our agenda here is information gathering tools, question design. Begin thinking about the questions that we're going to want to ask people who have experienced harm or experienced community safety response, and questions that we might want to ask people who are in the systems of response. Those might be different questions. I don't know that we need to do that all right now in public meeting as a first draft. That might be more homework if folks have capacity and are interested in doing that. I can send you an email with things that we might want to think about before next time, I think. Or it can be on the agenda that we warn very soon, because we now have a regular meeting schedule. So you'll be able to see what we'll talk about next time much earlier. But I think that, you know, as we have just shown in this last conversation about all of the various, I want to name too that there's people who are already on our list in the proposal who weren't named. There are very many other organizations that are already there. So if you're listening at home, you can go on the Brattleboro website, see the proposal, and there's more there. That's not a comprehensive list, but maybe we can now, you know, you all can think about what are the types of questions that are going to get to this, the roots of what we're asking. What is going to keep people safe? What have people's experiences been with safety response? What do people, I hope that there's space for imagination and vision, because that's the only way we get to the next world. What are people's ideas about what will keep their community and themselves safest, whether or not that exists yet? What are gaps in the system? What are things that need to be abolished permanently as in part of the response? We need to just be thinking about our questions and bringing those questions next time. And then we're going to plug those questions into those different formats: public forums, listening sessions, one-on-one interviews, anonymous tool. And then we're going to schedule a boatload of information gathering sessions quite soon that Emily and I will host a lot of, and that you all may participate in as you're interested in doing so. Drift, was that hand?
Yeah, I'm just, because some of the identities represented on this committee are leaning heavily certain ways, I'm just wondering, like, who's not here? Like, who do we want to maybe solicit? Can you share questions you would like us to include? Because we're only got a few people of color, or we've only got a few whatever, you know, I don't know, whatever we could just say, but what voices aren't represented here that we might want to ask those groups to say, hey, if you're willing to help us out and do the work, would you give us your perspective, because a lot of us aren't going to see it. And I don't want it all to go to Lana or whoever, you know, regardless of people's identities. Or Kaz, who's going to be the sanest, you know, who's going to like give those questions, you know. So I'm just wondering who we might want to ask to get more folks of color or different communities who aren't here questions.
I would like to make some space for public comment as a very great segue from that. There's a few minutes left of the meeting. I think it would be a great opportunity for some public comment, and we haven't made very many decisions yet, so I didn't know if it was relevant before. I'm sorry if you've been waiting this whole time. And then maybe also I can share our email address for the project at the end, and folks can email Emily and I if they have some feedback. Bob says in the chat, shouldn't the same questions be used across different methodologies for comparison purposes? We may want to have same questions that are very open questions that are asked in public forums and one-on-one interviews and listening sessions and online for people who have experienced harm or systems response. And then we might want to have a separate same set of questions for people who are part of the systems or organizations that are doing response. I don't know that we want to have those be all the same questions. That seems like those are separate to me, but that's a good point. I'm open to considering that sameness. I also want to allow for flexibility in the moment if somebody's, you know, sharing about something, and I don't want it to be so robotic that we can't be responsive to people's. We can have the same guiding questions maybe for an interview or something, and then go from there. But I don't want to lock us into a way of responding that's not, you know, very present, individualized way also.
Yeah, and I guess what I meant was not
Go
different
ahead,
questions, but like to make sure we're not just asking from a white normative structure, I guess is more my thing. You know, that's what I meant.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe that's another role that co-facilitators might be able to take on if we're not married to the idea that all the questions have to be exactly the same for everybody. We could also give co-facilitators a little bit of discretion about what the ways that they're engaging with their own community as is relevant. But I'm very grateful for that challenge to the way that the process is currently structured, Drift. I really want to make time for public comment now. Public, raise your digital blue hands if you have things that you would like to share with us. If you don't, that's okay. If you're on the phone, I believe you can do that by pressing *6.
*9.
*9. *9 on the phone. Okay. The silent observers. We hear your silence. We take it as support, hopefully, or at least hope you feel like you have space to be heard here if you would like to be. Okay. Next steps. Next meeting, we'll send you out an agenda very soon. We'll send out minutes really soon for you to formally approve from the last time. I think we're going to need to do 2 meetings worth of that because we didn't do it this time. Sorry, everybody. There's minutes from our last meeting on the town website in our committee. It's buried, you know, you go to like other committees and other boards and committees, community safety review team. There's a little tag on the side that says agendas and minutes. And then you can, that's where you find our info, everyone. But also if you want to take a look at Emily's notes from last time, we can approve them the next time.
And
We'll
don't
also put notes up from this one soon.
Sorry, we need to pick someone today to be the timekeeper for tomorrow, for next time.
Yeah, that would be so great. Thank you, Lon, for already doing a little bit of that role.
And then I had one community comment for a person who couldn't be here tonight. They said that it was really difficult to find the meeting space. So
yes, I agree with that. Do folks have suggestions for me as a facilitator of ways that we can make the meetings more visible? I think we can post-meeting, at this point, post-meeting, send these recordings to BCTV to be shared afterwards for these first 2. It can be on my homework list this week to see if we can live. Oh, Peter Elwell with a hand. He's gonna tell us what's up. Peter, you can unmute and unvideo block yourself and share it with us.
Hi.
Hey.
So thank you all for the amazing work that you're doing. It's been great watching you launch, and I'll stop there in respect for your time because we're almost 8 o'clock. The answer to how we can make this easier is thank you for identifying the just urgent need we have to upgrade our website. We've recognized that, and it's something we just haven't gotten around to, and we need to do that for a lot of other reasons more broadly in the community. As it relates to this, as important and urgent as this piece of work is, I think there's an easy solution even given our current clumsy state of our website, which is when we have things like this that we're trying to make sure are easier and more visible to the community, we highlight them over on the right side of the homepage in the column that has the header on it that says news. And within that, we do things like when representative town meeting is about to happen, we put on the RTM information right there, and budget information at that time of year and so on. So for this, I think it'll be very easy to put a link on tomorrow to the part of the page so you don't have to go navigating through 3 or 4 steps to get to the place where all of your materials are going to be, where your agendas are, where your minutes are, where other things you choose to post are going to be as this evolves. And the link to that spot will be one-stop shopping right on the town's homepage. We'll take care of it tomorrow.
That is so responsive of you. Thank you. I also still have it as my homework to reach out to BCTV and see if we can live stream the thing. That doesn't allow people to raise their hand and publicly participate. It just allows people to see it. And therefore, I don't know if it matters as much that it's live or just right afterward. The way to access the meeting and participate in it is going to be the way that Peter just described. I also have been putting it out on social media in a rare public setting post, and can maybe do that also on the Brattleboro town Facebook group, potentially, if folks feel good about that. That space gets a little wonky sometimes, but maybe we can do a better job of just publicizing it in those ways. And also I want to say that once we actually have a pretty solid feeling together about what those different information sessions are going to look like, we are going to be blasting them everywhere, so that hopefully at least that part is going to be, you can't miss it. That's my hope. I don't know. I'm going to rely on all of you to help me with that, but flyers, all the newsletters you get from organizations that you don't want to get, that's going to have it in. My hope is that it's just going to be everywhere, that you can just not miss how to get your voice heard in the process once it's that phase. radio ads. I have a voice for radio. I don't know. I want it to be everywhere. And yes, we could schedule a press release to the Reformer about this meeting schedule. Drift. Thank you for that comment in the comment box. Does anyone last minute? Yeah, Darlene.
Sorry, I'm good friends with Peter Fish too, and I know that he could do a radio broadcast for us.
Cool.
So Peter Fish, you know, he works downstairs from my office, and I planted a seed with him too, saying, hey, have you been following this? Because, you know, we could use you.
All right. That's what the heck is up with that, or whatever. Isn't that what he says? Is that guy's line? Okay. Does anyone have any burning last minute commentary before we adjourn almost on time this evening? I'll be reaching out to several of you once I watch this whole recording again and see what you all offered. And I'm really grateful for everybody's voices. We have a little bit of homework. We're going to think about questions. We're going to think about collaborators. We're going to think about where each of us might want to plug in those types of information gathering. And I will post notes and an agenda ASAP for you all so that you can have plenty of time to be prepared for the next one. And I'll see you next Monday.
Can you just send us all out emails with the homework?
What's that, Darlene?
Can you send out emails with the homework?
Yeah, I can put that just in the notes or the agenda too, just what we're gonna focus on next time.
Awesome.
And if you don't do the homework, there's no grading, there's no punitive, there's also no stickers or anything. It's just if you're able to think about those things, it will be helpful. And if not, it's wonderful. However you show up is just so helpful. It's already so helpful. What's that, Lana?
I want a sticker.
Okay, I'll see what I see. I said sticker, and now we'll see what, I don't even know if I'm allowed to send you all stickers. We'll talk.
Drift said he has a sticker collection.
The last thing I want to say is that our email for this process is Community Safety Review Team. So it's csrt@protonmail.com, I think. And that's also in the agenda that you can find on the internet. That's the way to send feedback or comment to just Emily Megas Russell and Shay Witzberger. That's the account that we're using for this process. Thank you all so much. Do we have to motion to adjourn, or we can just, does anybody want a motion to adjourn? We can just leave. Nobody has any disagreement about adjourning? Surprise there.
I move that we adjourn.
Yeah, okay. Thanks everybody. Take care. See you next time.
Take care.
Thanks everyone.